Okay, this next week of learning, today's daf we're going to learn is Pesachim Daf Hey. This next week of learning is dedicated in memory of Major Itai Zaiden and Corporal Lihu Ben Bassa, who were tragically killed in a plane crash in the course of training on Tuesday. Our thoughts are with the families. Today's daf is dedicated by Silke Goldberg in memory of her mother, Leonie Kimmel, Zichronah Livracha, who was an amazing teacher whose first year at site is just passed. And by Penina Lamb in honor of Tina and Shalom Lamb and Dodi Lamb, who finished Masechet Eruvin from the Elm Street Lambs. And by Victor and Caroline Offstein and Abby and Jonty Blackman in honor of their mom, Lynn Fisher, on her birthday today. May she have continued good health and happiness ad me'av yeslim. And in honor of the respective 20 and 40-year yurtzites of her dear parents, our grandparents, Edna and Harry Isaacs. May our learning be in their schut and may their neshamot have an aliyah. And Mashalamat and Joel Cohn for Refuah Shlema for Tova Matal Bat Chana Eti. With that, we're going to get started on our daf. The beginning of the daf particularly is a little bit dizzying. Okay, I made a sheet today to help you organize it. I'll give you the basic structure again. That'll help you keep things in with clarity in your heads. We started yesterday with a question of how do we know that chametz is forbidden and that it's both to eat and that one has to destroy it before 6 hours into the day. Remember, there's a little debate about when exactly we burn it and when it's really forbidden to eat because we go a little bit earlier, but by Torah law, it's from midday, 6 hours into the day, midday, chatzot. How do we know this? So we're going to have two answers to the question. We started with Abaye. We're going to answer also with Rava. But before we get to Rava, we're going to have first Abaye's answer. He's going to basically say that when it says, we saw this yesterday, when it says, Ach bayom harishon tashbitu seor mebatechem, on the one hand, it says 7 days you can't find seor in your houses, you can't have any leaven. Then it says, but on the first day, you should get rid of your chametz. How can you possibly do that? If you can't have leaven in your house all 7 days, how can you destroy it on the first day? It has to be destroyed before that. So he says it must be, we're going to see, it must be Arba Asar. It must be the day before. And we're going to have to see in a little while how he gets to midday. Okay, that's Abaye. Then we're going to see Rava. But before we get to Rava, we're going to basically have two other sources which don't seem to be disagreeing with, it's not part of this disagreement, Abaye, Rava, what's the source for midday on the day before. But what it is it's a way to say here's other proofs that Rishon doesn't mean the first day like it sounds like, but it means the day before. And we're going to see each proof. And one of them is going to create a lot of problems. And we're going to have a long discourse on questions on that approach. So that's going to be the basic structure until we get to the beginning of Amud Bet. Okay, and then we're going to see Rava, and then we're going to move on to a different topic. So again, we started with Abaye, who said it's learned out from those two psukim, and then the Gemara had asked the following question. 4 lines from the bottom of Dalet Amud Bet. I'll repeat this. Ve'ema lirabot lele chamishasar lebior. Maybe the chiyuv of having chametz, really only the forbidden nature of having chametz, only kicks in on the day of the 15th. And maybe on the night of the 15th is when you do biur. Okay, so salkadat hachamina yamin ktiv, because it says shivat yamin, for 7 days you can't have seor. Maybe it means yamin in leilot lo. Therefore, they say kamash malan. Maybe this whole pasuk is coming to teach you afilu leilo, that even nights are part of this, are forbidden also, but that it wouldn't be teaching you that it's from the day before. So they say no. Hahu lo itzrichale. You don't need a special pasuk to teach you. Now, this is funny because would you have ever thought this is a good example of the Gemara kind of looking at something that we think is totally obvious that it's not the case, and yet suggesting that maybe that's the case, right? Could you imagine eating chametz on the night of Pesach? That would be crazy. Now, why do you think that's crazy? Because we eat matzah, and you assume that there's this interconnection between eating matzah and the forbidden nature of eating chametz. That's exactly what the Gemara is questioning. What Abaye answers is clearly they're interconnected. Now, he doesn't say just because of logic, but he brings it from the psukim. And he says like this, you would never have thought that the night is really okay and that maybe it's only during the day and now we come say, well, therefore you burn it at night. Can't possibly be. Daha itkish, now it sounds a little confusing, but it's really not too confusing, and I charted it out to make it easy on the page. Daha itkish hashpatatse or lachilat chametz. Itkish means there's a hekesh in the pasuk. What's a hekesh, right? It's never good to define something by the word itself. Hekesh means two things appear juxtaposed in the verse. That means we're going to learn from one to the other. So we're going to have two hekeshes here. The first is getting rid of, destroying the leaven, le'achilat chametz, to eating the forbidden nature. In other words, the burning and getting rid of it is connected with eating chametz, the forbidden, when chametz is forbidden to be eaten. And achilat chametz, lachilat matzah. And eating chametz is interconnected, right? Is in a hekesh in the same verse as the pasuk about eating matzah, which means that you can't eat chametz at the same time that you're supposed to be eating matzah, which is basically going to then say, since we eat matzah on the first night of Pesach, which we're going to have to show how we know that, right, even though, again, you say this is totally obvious. Of course, we eat matzah the first night of Pesach, but we're going to prove it. Once we say that, it's going to basically go backwards now. If we eat matzah, then we can't eat chametz. If we can't eat chametz, then we have to burn it. And that's going to basically prove that we didn't need this pasuk to teach you that it has to be destroyed before the night, but that the night is forbidden, because we already know it's forbidden from some other place. So how do we know this? Dichtiv. So they kind of say there's a hekesh, but now we want to know, where is there this hekesh, these juxtaposed verses. Shivat yamim se'or lo yimatzeh bebatechem. Okay, that's what we have, right? Getting rid of the chametz. Ki kol ochel machmetza v'nichreta. Because anyone who eats chametz will be destroyed, cut off. So what do you see here? Eating chametz is connected with destroying chametz. The next verse is going to have to connect between eating chametz and not being allowed to eat chametz and eating matzah. Achilat chametz lachilat matzah. How so? Tichtiv kol machmetza lo tochelu. Okay, these are just verses. I'm stopping in the middle of them to explain, but anything leavened you cannot eat. B'chomosh votechem tochlu matzot, and everywhere you live, you should eat matzah. Okay, so therefore, what do you see here? Eating matzah is connected with not eating chametz, and not eating chametz is connected with destroying chametz. So therefore, it seems, right, it's all going to be interconnected, and the one piece we're missing is, how do we know you have to eat matzah the first night of Pesach? The verse says, and you eat matzah at night. So from there, we derive that it's clear. In other words, you didn't need this verse to teach you that, because we learned it from elsewhere, which means that this verse is free to say, oh, it must be Yud Daled, and it's not like we do it the night of Pesach, because it can't possibly be. Ve'ema lerabot leil Yud Daled lebior. Okay, so we've proven that Bayom HaRishon, Tashbitu Se'or Mevatechem, doesn't mean like we thought it meant the first day of Pesach, like you might have thought. If you didn't have all this, you would think Yom HaRishon is referring to the Yom HaRishon of the holiday, but it actually means Yud Daled. If it means Yud Daled, well, if we talk about generally halacha and we say do something on a particular day, usually it kicks in at night, because the day starts from the night in Judaism. So why didn't you say Leil Yud Daled lebiur, which would also make sense in light of our Mishnah. We do b'dikat chametz. Maybe you have to get rid of the chametz from there. Again, it's obvious to us that we don't do this, but that's just because we're used to it. But the Gemara is suggesting maybe that's not the way it's supposed to be. Or how do we know that we don't do it from the night? Bayom ktiv, because it says Bayom HaRishon. Yom means day, not night. So then they say, wait, but if it means day, now normally when something's an obligation of the day, I'll give you a good example. We've talked about this before. Sacrifices were never done at night. They were always done during the day. But when during the day do you do them, right? Other than the ones that are specifically for the afternoon, like the Korban Tamid, Shel Ben Ha'arbayim, okay, the afternoon one. But all the other sacrifices, you do them in the morning. We always do things in the morning. So if it says Bayom, then shouldn't we have to stop eating chametz from the morning? Ema mitzafra. Why wouldn't you say from the morning? So then they say, ach chilek. The word ach bayom harishon. We had this at the end of Eruvin also. Told you that we were going to get to that there was this connection here. Ach comes to say only part, which means only part of the day. Ach means but. So but means, oh, we're going to split the day. Half will be allowed, half will not be allowed. And that's how we get. Bayom teaches us day, ach teaches us midday. Now, it's not 100% clear that it would have to be chatzot according to this, but we'll see that Rava's explanation of chatzot is much stronger, although even with Rava, there's a bit of an issue. But still, you could say if you're going to split the day, you'll split it exactly in half. Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana. So now I told you that was Abaye, and now we're going to have two other sources. One is a Braita and one is Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who are going to show that Rishon sometimes means or could mean the day before. So Rabbi Yishmael Tana, Matzinu Yudalit Shenikra Rishon. I'll bring you another proof that the 14th is called Rishon. How so? Shenemal barishon ba'arba'asar yom lachodesh. Okay, this is actually ba'erev tochlu matzot. That evening you should eat matzah. It's a little bit strange that it calls it the 14th because the evening is already the 15th. But why is it called the 14th? And by the way, Pesach is a unique holiday than all the other holidays because it's the only holiday that things happen on Erev Pesach, right? What happens? We bring the Korban Pesach. It's got a different nature than Erev Sukkot or Erev Shavuot, where it's just a preparatory yom, but a preparatory day. But here, it's really, right? It's the 14th itself has significance to it. And he proves it. And he says, look, even here in the verse itself talks about, it says, Bayom HaRishon, right? And then it said, or it doesn't say Bayom HaRishon, it says Barishon, Ba'arba'asar Yom L'Chodesh. So here it connects Rishon with the day of the 14th and not the 15th when Pesach really starts. So he proves, just kind of supporting that Rishon could mean, as Abaye said, because again, Abaye's proof is Bayom HaRishon is the 14th. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amal, Rishon de me'ikar mashma. Rishon actually means before. Okay, that's what he wants to say. Instead of being first day, it really means the day before the holiday. Okay, how do we know this? Tamar Kra, now we're quoting a verse from Eov. Harishon Adam Tivaled, which means what? Were you born before Adam HaRishon? Like, who do you think you are? You were born before Adam HaRishon? Which, right? So Harishon means before Adam. Were you born before? So therefore, that he says Rishon must mean before. Now, this is a statement that's very much going to really trouble the rabbis. And the reason is because we're now going to bring a number of verses in the Torah relating to holidays, 2 about Sukkot and 1 about Pesach, where it says Harishon, and clearly it means the first day of the holiday and not before. So that's our whole huge tangent right now is going to be question on Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. If you look at the sheet, you can see it's question, right? There's an answer, and then we're going to have a lot of a question on that, then an answer, then a question on that, then an answer, then a question on that. It's going to be a very long-winded question, answer, question, answer. So could it really be, right? Ela me'ata, if that's the case, that Rishon means the day before, ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon, hachanami rishon demeikar hamashma. This is the verse that talks about you should take on the first day the lulav and the etrog, the 4 species. So now you're going to say that you're supposed to take on Erev Sukkot. Nobody thinks that. You don't take them on Erev Sukkot. You take them on the first day. Okay. And those days, by the way, and we're going to see this, they only, in the Beit HaMikdash, they would take it all 7 days, but outside the temple, they would do it only on the first day. So what do they answer? Shane hatam dichtiv usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem shivat yamim. At the end of that verse, when it says, "Ulakachtem lachem," it then says, and you should rejoice before God for 7 days. So they say, what 7 days are we talking about? Is it counting from Erev or is it counting from the first day? It's obviously counting the 7 days of Pesach from the first day. So Mash Shvi'i Shvi'i Lachag, just like the number 7 there means the 7th day of the holiday. Af Rishon Rishon Lachag. Also the first day is the first day of the holiday. So now they say, wait a minute. Hachinami Ktiv. If you're going to say their Rishon means really the first day of the holiday because it's connected with day number 7, and day number 7 is clearly, or 7 days, and the 7 days are clearly referring to the days of the holiday, and therefore this is the first of those, well, the same thing appears in our verse by Pesach. Let's read. Hachinami ktiv, ach bayom harishon tashbitu, and then in the next verse it says, shivat yamim matzot tochelu, and then it says, and for 7 days, you should eat matzah, just like it says that you should be happy for 7 days, in which case the first day should really be Tet Vav, which they're claiming is not. So that's not a good proof. So what do they say? Well, you're right that theoretically, because it says 1 and then 7, it should have meant 1 of 7, but it doesn't. Why doesn't it? Because in King Nichtov Ka Rishon, if it wanted to say 1 out of 7, it would have said Rishon without the Hey HaYediah. Hey means the. So the comes to teach you Harishon Lamali, Shmamina Lechidam Aran. The extra hey in our verse comes to tell you it's the, okay? The Rishon, which comes to teach you it's not a typical Rishon. It's not the first of 7. It's actually the first of the, it's the day before. That sounds very nice, but what's the problem? I don't know if you notice this, but Ihachi Hatam Nami Harishon Lamali. The verse that we quoted in Sukkah to question also has a Hey Yediyah. It also says Harishon. So if you want to say Rishon means 1 out of 7, let's say, or 1 out of whatever it might be, and Harishon means the day before. Also by Sukkot, it says, Ulakachtam lachem bayom Harishon. So what are you going to do with the Hey Yediyah there? And furthermore, they're going to ask, V'tu hatem dichtiv. And now it's not just Ulakachtam lachem bayom Harishon. There's another verse by Sukkot which talks about the fact that you can't do work on the holiday. And what does it say? It tells you that the first day and the 8th day are Chag, they're Yom Tov. You can't do work. Dichtiv, look what it says there. Bayom harishon Shabbaton, ubayom hashmini Shabbaton. Notice what it says there. On the first day with the Hey Yediyah, you can't do malacha, you can't do work. And also on the 8th day. So, Ima Rishon de Meikara Mashma, are you going to say that that verse is talking about Erev, right? Does anyone think Erev Sukkot, it's forbidden to do malacha? Not possible. So what do they answer? First, they answer the second question. Okay, we're now stuck with 2. We have Sukkot of Lulav and Etrog and the Arba'at Haminim. And the second is Isur Malacha. So we're going to start with the Isur Malacha, the forbidden, the one that we just quoted, Bayom Rishon Shabbaton, Bayom Hashmini Shabbaton. Shane Hatam de Amarkra, Uvayom Hashmini Shabbaton. It says, and on the 8th day is Shabbaton. So what does it come to teach you? So Mashmini Shmini Dechag, Af Rishon Rishon Dechag. So the reason why it's not going to be Erev is because, again, it's like we said before. It says later and the 8th day. The 8th day is clearly the 8th day of the holiday, not the 8th day starting from Erev. So since it's the 8th day of the holiday, also the first is the first day of the holiday. Harishon Lamali, but what's the Hey doing there then? Again, we're stuck with our question. And this seems to relate, again, there's different ways people read this, but this seems to relate to both questions, both for the Arba Haminim and for the Isur Malacha, not being allowed to do Malacha, those 2 verses. Limi'ute cholosh hamoed. In this case, we need the Hey for a different reason. The Hey needs to tell us that it's only 1 and 8, and it's not any of the intermediary days. It's not forbidden to do work, and it's not forbidden, and you don't have to take the Lulav and Etrog and Hadassim and Aravot. Now, this is a little bit strange. What do you mean? You can't do malacha? You're allowed to do work on Chol HaMoed. Isn't there an Isur Malacha on Chol HaMoed? It's also forbidden to do malacha. Well, now it's not the same malacha, but you're not supposed to work. The only way we allow work is if you're going to have a financial loss, which I'm not going to get into all the details of what that means, right? This is something what we'll learn later. There's a very interesting debate here among the commentaries. Some people say from here you can see that the Isur Malacha on Chol HaMoed is not by Torah law, because by Torah law, this excludes Chol HaMoed from the world of Isur Malacha in general. Some people say no, this just excludes the part of Isur Malacha that you're not obligated in. In other words, if it's going to be financial loss, then you're allowed to do Malacha. But basic Isur Malacha is Midoraita. So there's a very basic debate about work on Chol HaMoed. Is it forbidden by Torah law or is it forbidden by rabbinic law? It's a very important debate, and it comes up here. In any case, they say, okay, so now, again, the whole issue was Harishon. Harishon means, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, from yesterday, right, the day before. How could that be if by Sukkot it doesn't mean that? So we say, oh, by Sukkot, Harishon comes to exclude Chol HaMoed. That's what they're explaining now. But they say, wait a minute, you don't need the Hey to teach you not on Chol HaMoed. Cholosh HaMoed me Rishon U'Shmini Nafka. What do you mean? It says Bayom Rishon and Bayom Shmini. Let's say we didn't have the Hey. It would say day number 1 and day number 8. You don't need it to say the first and the 8th. No matter what you would know, it doesn't include Chol HaMoed. It would be obvious, even if you didn't have the Hey. So they say, no, it wouldn't be obvious. Itzrich. Salkadat Tachamina, you need the Hey. Why? Because if you didn't have the Hey, what might you have thought? Ho'il de Katav Rachmana Ubayom Shmini. Notice when it says the first day and the 8th day. Now, Vav is often, they say, Vav Mosif Alinyan Rishon. The Vav comes to add to the first thing, which means that the Vav is coming for something additional. What would be additional? Maybe you would think, Da'afilu b'cholosh hamoed. Maybe when it says 1 and 8, it means 1 through 8. And therefore, you might have thought maybe all the days are forbidden in Malacha. Kamash Malan. That's why you need the Hey of Harishon, okay, which then gets us back to our original. Hey of Harishon in our verse comes to teach you Erev Pesach, you have to burn the chametz. Hey on Sukkot in both the verses comes to teach you not on Chol HaMoed, okay, and you need it. But then they say, wait a minute, what's the whole reason? This is a great Gemara question. What's the whole reason? The whole reason you need it is because of the vav. That extra vav makes you add the extra hey. So what does the Gemara ask? Why did they put the vav in the first place if it was just going to confuse us? Get rid of the vav and then you don't need the hey. We're saying the hey came because of the vav. Why didn't the verse just say Bayom Rishon, Bayom Hashmini? And then we know it's only the first and only the eighth, and we wouldn't need this hey to teach us that. And furthermore, we're now going to bring in a third verse. Hatam dichtiv. Look at Pesach. What does it say by Pesach? Pay close attention. Bayom Rishon Mikra Kodesh Yelachem. Okay, now they don't tell you the end, but the end is, and I brought this on the sheet, Bayom Hashvi'i Mikra Kodesh. It says the first day is holiday, the seventh day is the holiday. And notice what's missing there? The vav. It doesn't say vi hayom harishon. Okay, so here you have a case where the vav isn't there at all. So in the first case, we say, why didn't you just get rid of the vav and then you wouldn't need the hey? And in this case, you don't have the vav at all, then also you wouldn't need the hey. And yet it says here, notice the words, bayom harishon, bayom hashvi. So now we've added a third verse that complicates things, because also this verse doesn't mean rishon erev Pesach. It means the first day of Pesach. So what's the hey coming for? So now they're going to, and they're going to say Rishon to me. Karamashma, what? You're going to think the Rishon in that Pesach means yesterday, right? Erev. So they basically reject this line of reasoning. They're still going to explain Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak why he said Harishon by us is, we're still on Harishon by us means Erev. What about these three Harishons, the Lulav, the Sukkot, and the Pesach Pasuk? What are we going to do with those three psukim? We have three Rishons. Well, guess what they're going to learn from this? You might not have guessed this on your own. I don't think you could come up with this one. These three Rishons were to teach you what we see in this Braita of Rabbi Yishmael, which is Ditana de Rabbi Yishmael. Bischar Shlosha Rishon. When the merits of these three Rishons, if we keep these three mitzvot of malacha, not doing malacha on the first day of Sukkot, the first day of Pesach, and on the first day, you're supposed to bring the lulav and etrog. Zachu l'shlosha rishon. The people are going to merit to have three firsts. What are the three firsts? Lachrit zar'o shel Esav, to destroy the descendants of Esav. Libinyan Beit HaMikdash, to rebuild the temple, and Lishmo Shel Mashiach. Okay, and to be rewarded by having the Mashiach. How is this? Where's the Rishon? This comes from last week's Parsha. Vayetze HaRishon, notice it says HaRishon, the first, Admoni Kulo Kader Tze'ah, right? He came out red with red hair, full of hair. Ulibinyan Beit HaMikdash Dichtiv, Kisei Kavod Marom Merishon. It's raised from the beginning. That's the place of our dwelling, of the Mikdash. Ulishmo Shel Mashiach Dichtiv Rishon LeTzion Hinei Hinam. Okay, the Rishon LeTzion is a name for the Mashiach. So here you have three Rishons. This is, again, the rabbi's way of trying to encourage people to do things. If we do this, we will merit to the following three things. That's what the Hay is for, and Sugya. Okay, that part of the Sugya. So we basically conclude, according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Harishon means Me'ikara. We learned it from Eov. And because of the Ha'yidiyah, if it was just Rishon, we wouldn't have been able to. Harishon comes to teach you. It's the day before. The fact that Harishon appears in other places doesn't mean that that comes for other reasons and not for this reason. Okay, now moving on to Rava. Rava Amar Mehacha. Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. He says there's a verse that says you can't slaughter the Pesach on chametz, the blood of my offering. So you're not allowed to slaughter and create the blood that we need while you have chametz in your reshut. That's what they're going to explain. Lo tishchat ha-pesach v'adayin chametz kayam. This is why I said Rav has a much better explanation for chatzot. Why chatzot? Although I said there's a little bit of a problem. The chiyuv of bringing the karma pesach starts in the afternoon. Okay, now it happens. Afternoon is really 12 hours, and it's midday and half an hour. And you actually have to bring the korban tamid first because of the concept of tadir v'sheino tadir kodem. We always do what the normal thing is first. So we end up with, we have to do the korban tamid. So the actual obligation to slaughter the Pesach kicks in a little bit later, but that's for technical reasons. Theoretically, already afternoon, it's already the time for korban Pesach. Therefore, at that point, you can no longer own chametz. That's what this verse teaches you. You can't own chametz while you're slaughtering your korban pesach. Now, there's very interesting differences between the two. First of all, Rava is only connected to korban pesach. So maybe nowadays, he would think that it's not relevant because we don't bring the korban pesach anymore. So an Abaye is obviously relevant to anybody because as long as there's chiyuv matzah, which there is still nowadays, then it will be relevant anyway. That's one difference. Another is that Abaye is preparatory, right? It's so that you don't have chametz, you have to get rid of it. According to Rava, it's part of the mitzvah of the korban. Like in order to do the korban, there's all sorts of mitzvot associated with it. This is one of them. It's almost like a connected with the korban. It's a positive. It's not just to make sure you don't have chametz on you for the holiday. No, it has to do with the sacrifice itself. Okay, and one can think about a number of other differences, but we're going to move on from here. So, Ema kocha b'chad. So now they say, wait, according to you, Rava, if it's that we don't want you to have chametz in your possession when you slaughter the korban pesach, well, all afternoon people are slaughtering their own korban pesachs. So why don't you say each individual kishachit? When they slaughter, that's when the isur kicks in. Okay, and not just randomly arbitrarily. It doesn't relate to me specifically, but for everybody, it's chatzot. Why don't you just say, I have to make sure to get rid of my chametz before I go sacrifice my korban pesach? So they say no, because man shchita amar Rachmana. The Torah was referring to the time where one could potentially do the shchita. That's what it means, and therefore, and this is classic for Gemara, we don't like to start making everything subjectified. You do it one time, you do it another time. We want a system where everybody has the same time. Now we bring a Tanya Nami Hachi. Tanya Nami Hachi means we're going to bring a Braita to support. Now, it sounds like from the Gemara that the Tanya Nami Hachi is coming to support Rava, and that's what many of them are Farshim explain, but you're going to see that they bring three opinions. The first opinion is going to support Rava, but the third opinion actually supports Abaye. And there are some who explain, and to me that seems like the pshat, that this is a Braita supporting both Abaye and Rava with different opinions. So now we're going to talk about, do you hear me now? Yeah, okay. So now we're going to bring the Braita. So like I said, three answers for the same question. Ach bayom harishon tashbitu seor mibatechem me'erev yom tov o eino ela b'yom tov atzmo. When do we burn this? Exactly our question. Do we burn it on Yom Tov or the day before? Talmud lomar lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi lo tishchat et pesach v'adayin chametz kayam divrei Rabbi Yishmael. He says exactly what Rava said. Rabbi Akiva Omer, this is an opinion we haven't seen. Eino tzarich, you don't need that verse. Why? Hareu Omer ach bayom harishon tashbitu seor mibatechem uchtiv kol malacha lo yeaseh. It's a typo. It should be lo yeaseh. So it says you have to get rid of the chametz on the first day, which sounds like the 15th. But on the 15th, it says you can't do any work. Now, what is malacha? Umatzinu lahavarashi av malacha. To light a fire is malacha. It's forbidden on the 15th. Now, you might say, what do you mean? We light fires on Yantif. We can transfer flames, but that's only for the purposes of ochal nefesh, if we need to eat. This is to destroy, not to eat. You can't light a fire to destroy. So therefore, from the fact that you can't, it's an av malacha, and you can't do it on the 15th, it must be that you do it before. That's a different proof we haven't seen. Rabbi Yossi Omer, and this is going to be very much like Abaye, Eino tzarich, you don't need your verse, I have a better verse. Hareu Omer, ach bayom harishon tashbitu seor mibatechem me'erev yom tov o eino ela miyom tov. Again, the same question. Eino ela b'yom tov. Talmud lomar ach chilek. Remember, the ach comes to say it's going to split the day in half. V'i b'yom tov atzmo mishare. Now wait. If you're going to say we're going to split the day in half the day is forbidden, half the day is permitted, you're going to say on the 15th, half the day you can eat chametz and half the day you can't. That's not possible. Ha'it kish, how do we know that's not possible? And here it brings up exactly what Abaye said. Ha'it kish, there's a hekesh, the juxtaposition of hashbatat seor lachilat chametz, vachilat chametz, lachilat matzah. Again, a repeat of what we saw, and that's why he seems to prove Abaye. Amarava. Now we're going to say an aside. Once we have Rabbi Akiva's opinion here, Shema minami de Rabbi Akiva tlat. You can infer three things. Again, we have this Shema mina tlat. I said that always comes up. We can learn three things from here. Shema mina. Ein bior chametz ela sreifa. So first of all, it's obvious that according to Rabbi Akiva, the only way you can get rid of chametz is by actually burning it. Now, you might think, of course it's burning it. How else do you get rid of chametz? No, there's lots of ways you get rid of chametz. And I know people like to joke on Erev Pesach when they eat their whatever chametz they're eating, you're doing a mitzvah because you're getting rid of your chametz. You can give it to your dog. There's so many ways you can get rid of your chametz that aren't burning. But since he says you obviously can't do it on the 15th because it's forbidden because of the burning, obviously the only way he thinks you could do it is by burning. Ushmamina havara lechalek yatzat. Remember this whole thing? This we learned in Masechet Shabbat. It says, Lo tevaru esh b'chomosh v'techem. You can't light a fire on Shabbat. Now, normally, what do we say? That all the melachot are not mentioned explicitly in the Torah. Why does it specifically say you can't light a fire? Some people say it's because it's not as severe as all the rest. So it's separating it to say, this one is only a lo taseh. You'd only get lashes. You wouldn't get stoned if you did it. Whereas the rest of Shabbat, you get skila, you get stoned. It's much more serious. But obviously, Rabbi Akiva doesn't think this, because if Rabbi Akiva thought that, then what would he think? He would say, we have a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment to destroy the chametz. We have a negative commandment. You can't burn on the holiday. But when you have a positive commandment, it overrides a negative commandment. So if that's the case, then we would say, even though if it's only a lo taseh, even if it's only a negative commandment, then we could say, okay, not such a big deal. Since you have a positive commandment, that overrides the negative. But we don't say that because he says you can't do it on the 15th. So obviously he doesn't think that it's coming lelav yatzat. Why is it separated from all the others? Lechalek yatzat. Remember this? This was all, we spent a long time on this on Masechet Shabbat, which was to teach you that if you forgot it was Shabbat and you did a number of different melachot, each one gets its own korban chatat, and likewise havara also, right? It's to teach you that each malacha is independent. And if you did some act that involved a number of malachot, you'd have to bring multiple korbanot chatat, sin offerings. And the third thing we derive from him, shma mina, lo amrinan ho'il v'hutra avara litzorech, hutra nami shelo litzorech. We can say that since we allow transferring a flame on Yom Tov for the purposes of cooking, we can allow it for all other purposes, even if you're not planning to cook. You can't say that, because if you could say it, then we would have said it also here, and we would have allowed you to burn the chametz on the chag. Okay, that was the total aside. Now we're going to darshan. We're moving on. That was the end of that sugya. Now we're going to talk about the psukim lo yira'eh and lo yimatzeh. Okay, there's two verses, or there's actually more than two, but I'll read you the verses. In Shmot Yubet, Pasuk Yud Tet, it says, Shiv'at yamim se'or lo yimatzeh bebatechem. You cannot find chametz in your house. Like chametz cannot be found in your houses. That's one. Then it says, Lo yera'eh, we're now in Shmot Yud Gimel Zayin, and we're going to see later that the exact phrase appears also in Sefer Dvarim, Perek Tet Zayin, Pasuk Dalet. V'lo matzot yachel et shivat yamim. V'lo yera'eh lecha chametz, you can't see chametz. V'lo yera'eh lecha se'or, you can't see any leavening. And 11, bechol gvulecha. Now, I want you to notice a few differences between the two verses. Okay, you can't see. So one says you can't find, one says you can't see. The one that says you can't find says in your houses. The one that says you can't see says in your boundaries. And it also says lo yira'eh lecha, for you, where it doesn't say that by lo yimatzeh. We're now going to quote a Braita. Parts of this Braita are not so comprehensible. The Gemara is going to have to explain them after. Tanu Rabbanan. Shivat Yamim, there's a lot of sections. What I did was I was trying to figure out how to chart it. I just basically split it up. We're going to have 5 different sections here. It's kind of 4 that split into 5, but we're going to go through the sections now. Shivat Yamim se'or lo yimatzeh bebatechem. Ma tamud lomar. V'lo kvar ne'emar, lo yira'eh lecha se'or v'lo yira'eh lecha chametz. It already says lo yira'eh. Why do you need lo yimatzeh? B'chol gvulcha. Lefishin, it's actually, the pasuk is a little reversed here. It should say lo yira'eh lecha chametz and lo yira'eh lecha se'or b'chol gvulcha. It's a little bit reversed in the text of the Gemara here. Lefishin emar lo yira'eh lecha se'or. What would you think? If just from lo yira'eh lecha, it sounds like shelcha yataro'eh aval ataro'eh shel acherim v'shel gavoa. This comes to teach you lo yira'eh lecha, specifically your own, not meaning this I talked about the other day. If you see someone across the street carrying chametz and they're not Jewish, right, then no problem, right? You can see other people's if it's not yours, or you could see shel gavoa if it belongs to the temple. Somebody sanctified it, it's sanctified, it's not your own. Yachol yatmi. Now, the whole question was, why do we also have bal yimatzeh? So we're going to have to see lo yimatzeh. Yachol yatmin. Now, if it says you can't see, let's say I hide it under my mattress. Is that okay? I don't see it, right? If I don't see it, maybe it's okay. Or yikabel piktonot min hanochli. Or maybe a non-Jew can give me their stuff to watch. Maybe that's okay if it's chametz. Talmud lomar lo yimatzeh. It can't be found, not in any way, not from a Gentile in your own house, and not from hiding it. Okay, that's what lo yimatzeh comes to teach you. Now we have a very complicated line. It seems like they're referring to, it's not, when they say it's forbidden, that's a nochri that you haven't conquered and isn't living among you. That's obvious. No, it's not really so obvious. Why would that be obvious? It's not so clear. We're going to question this. But what if you conquered a nochri and he's living among you? How do we know that that's also forbidden? That comes to teach you in your house, even if there's someone living in your house. Now, the logic here is a little bit the opposite of what you would have thought. You would have thought it's more likely it would be forbidden if they're living in your house and they're owned by you, right? It would be the opposite of what this says, and hold off, we're going to get back to that. Next thing. Well, it says bibatechem. That means in your house. That this is going to remind you of Eruvin. But what about all sorts of things that belong to you, ditches and caves that belong to you but are not dwelling places? Bibatechem sounds like only dwelling places. This is why we have both verses, because each addresses a different aspect. Means anything you own. But maybe you'd say then, so then, according to this, what did we learn from Bal Yimatzeh? It can't be found anywhere. Not if you hide it, and not if you took it from a Gentile. But that would only be where Bal Yimatzeh applies in the houses. So bebatim you have Bal Yimatzeh, Bal Yatmin, Bal Yikabel Piktonot Min Hanochri. But bigvulin, but you would say, but in the borot, the shichin and the marot, which are not in your houses, where it doesn't refer to those things, but then we have, right, bigvulin, it only says that, right? And we have drashot relating to Bal Yimatzeh, we have drashot relating to Bal Yireh. Since Bal Yireh is talking about property you own and not your houses, and the other one is talking about your houses, how do we know that one is true for the other and that all these things are all one big thing and they all work together? How do we know this? Talmud lomar seor l'gzeira shava. Gzeira shava is when we have two words that appear in both places. We could say what's true for one is true for the other, and that's what we're going to basically say here. Ne'emar seor babatim, seor le'matzeh babatechem. V'ne'emar seor b'gvulin, lo yireh lecha seor. Since seor appears in both, ma seor ha'amor babatim over mishum bal yireh o bal yimatzeh o bal yatmin o bal yikabel piktonom min hanochri. All those things are forbidden. Therefore, af seor amor b'gvulin over mishum bal yireh o bal yimatzeh o bal yatmin o bal yikabel piktonom min hanochri. Same thing. You can't take something from a Gentile, say I'll watch it for you, and you put it in your ditch. That doesn't work either. Even though it was really learned out from the verse about the houses, it still applies to the gvulin because of the gzeira shava. And likewise, ma seor amor b'gvulin. Notice we had that whole thing shelcha lo yireh lecha. It only said it by things in the gvulin. How do we know, right? So maybe only, that was all to say, if there's a non-Jew who's got his own stuff on him, it's not a problem for you. Maybe that's not a problem if it's in your ditch, but maybe if it's in your house where you live, maybe it's a problem. But no, we're going to say it applies there too. From the Gzeira Shava, we learn that even in your house, this is a good example. If you have a cleaner who comes to your house and they clean your house, and while they're in their house, they eat their sandwich that they bring from home, it's not a problem because it's not yours. They're just in your house. It's not an issue. Now, we're going to have this problem, though, because didn't we just say that nochri shaloki bashto ve'ein sharoyimcha is a problem, and the nochri that you is also a problem, which seems like it is a problem to see stuff that doesn't belong to you. So we're going to have to explain this. So Amar Mar, that's what we're going to start with. This line, Ein liyala, first they're just quoting the Braita. Ein liyala b'nochri shaloki bashto ve'ein sharoyimcha b'chatzer. So the Gemara says, it should be the opposite. It's more obvious that you're going to have an issue when the Nochri is living in your house and you've conquered him, he's kind of yours, rather than the case where he hasn't and he's not in your Chatzer. That's the one that needs teaching. So Amar Abaye, Ipuch. Abaye says, switch the order. It's really a mistake and the order should be switched. And it's really saying, how do you know a nochri that you capture and is living in your house? Of course, he can't have chametz in your own house because he's owned by you. But even someone who's not, it's going to be a problem. But Rava says, no, you misunderstood this whole line. Lo'olam lo tepuch ve'al shakai. This line is not referring to the fact that just like you can't hide things and you can't take pikdon omen anochui, also this you can't. No, it's referring to the beginning. What did the Braita say in the beginning? We said you can't see your own, but you can see something that belongs to someone else. It's not forbidden to look at chametz. That's not a problem. So now it makes perfect sense because we're talking about what's allowed. It's allowed, for sure we understand if it's allowed, if he's not owned by you and he doesn't live by you, right? You just see him across the street. But where do you know that if you conquer him and he's living in your house, still he can have his own chametz and it's not a problem for you? It's the exact opposite of what we thought. Talmud lomar lo yimatzeh. Therefore, it says it can't be found. Now, this is really weird. What do you mean? You just brought a pasuk to prove it's allowed, and the pasuk you brought to prove that it's allowed is you cannot find. You shouldn't, right? It sounds like that's a lotas say you can't. It sounds like it's talking about something forbidden. So they're going to darshan in a bit of a roundabout way. Mishum shenemar lecha lecha trezine. I told you this before, that the verse lo yera'eh lecha b'chol gvulcha appears twice, once in Shemot, once in Devarim. I brought it on the sheet if you want to look. Those psukim appear twice. Now, there's no point for the pasuk to appear twice. When something appears and it's unnecessary, the rabbis use a type of drasha called im eino inyan lezeh t'nei inyan to something else. Meaning, if it's not coming to teach you this because it already taught you that word, and now they're dashing the word lecha that appears twice, must be coming to refer to bal yimatzeh, to the lo yimatzeh pasuk. And what it really means to say here is lo yimatzeh lecha. It's not found for you, even though the verse doesn't say that. It's as if it says it because of the imei no inyam, because of the extra verse, which means when they say lo yimatzeh, they're quoting lo yimatzeh lecha, for you, meaning if someone's living in your house, even if you own them, if they're Gentile, they can have chametz, it doesn't bother you. Okay, and that's the opposite conclusion that Abaye comes to. Okay, Amar, last part for today. Yachol yatmi b'kabel piktonot min anochri. Talmud lomar lo yimatzeh. But ha'amart reisha shalcha yataroeh aval ataroeh shel achirim v'shel gavoah. We now have this problem. We say that you can see chametz of somebody else, but we also say that you can't take a pikadon. A Gentile can't give you something to watch, but that's not yours. Why should it be forbidden? So they're going to distinguish lokashya. There's two types of ways that you can have something of someone else's. If you assume responsibility, and this is something we're going to learn about in Mitzvah, but we've talked about this before. If I assume responsibility for something, that means if you give me your item to watch, and I say if it gets stolen, I'll pay you back. In that case, I have a partial ownership over it, which means I can't have that in my house on Pesach. That's the pikadon min anochri. But if the nochri gives you something to watch and I don't take responsibility, I say, listen, I'll watch it for you, but if something happens to it and I'm not paying you back, then I'm allowed to have it in my house because I have no ownership over it whatsoever. And now we're going to prove it. We're going to prove from a story. Rava said to this people in the city of Machose, get rid of before Pesach all the chametz of the soldiers. What are the soldiers? The soldiers, the Gentile soldiers that were living in the town, gave them flour and other things and said, make bread for us. So the Jews would make the bread for them, or food, they prepare food for them. You have to get rid of all their stuff. Why? And therefore, since if they were to get stolen or lost, they would demand that you gave it, right? These soldiers, for sure, right? These were these Gentile local soldiers that the Jews were always scared of. They for sure are going to make you pay them the money. And if that's the case, you'll have to pay. And therefore, it's as if they're yours right now. And therefore, it's forbidden and you have to get rid of it from your house. Okay, we're going to stop here for today because the next section, we're going to have two versions of it. I'll just start with this tomorrow about another, about a question on this. Okay, so we basically have that if you own it, you have some sort of responsibility for it. It's as if you own it, and therefore you can't have the Gentiles in your house. But if you didn't, have any ownership, right? Like let's say you have a worker in your house and they bring their own food, even if they're living among you, even if they always live among you, if it's their stuff, it's not a problem as long as you have no responsibility for their food. Okay, so that was our beginning drasha on Bal Yereh and Bal Yimatzeh. We'll pick up from here tomorrow. Have a great day.